Welcome.
Hello.
We just saw your show, and you can maybe just tell us a little bit where you're from, your name, and
Sure. My name's Jeff, and my little company is called Bunk Puppets. And I grew up in Canada, and I work out of Australia now. I live in Australia. Yeah. And I've got a couple shadow puppet shows that I tour with. My background's more as a clown, so all the shows sort of have kind of a clown beginning to them, and then everything gets sort of added on
yeah,
to the clowning. Yeah.
because you say that because that's one of my first question is your exact background. Because you don't come from inside the theater, you come from the outside of the building.
So
sort of.
I got into performing originally as a kid. I used to do a lot of juggling, and then naturally with juggling, you're expected to show it to people, and so you're always at birthday parties being offered $10 to juggle for 10 minutes or something. So that was my first taste of sort of performing, I guess. And then so I got into busking, street performing. From that, I went to school. I went to a really good school in Canada for like science. But in the summer in Montreal, they had an area where you could street perform. So that's where I started to learn about comedy and clowning. And I used to speak a lot, and I used to juggle fire and all this kind of stuff. And that really introduced me to clowning. And then slowly I stopped juggling, and I just was doing a lot of improvisation clowning with people. And slowly I stopped speaking. This is over like a period of maybe 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And then I started traveling a lot with that, and discovering all these festivals around the world, in Europe and Australia, places that have this culture of doing a show, and then you pass the hat at the end,
Right.
and you make the money just off the hat. But then gradually I discovered these festivals in Europe that will pay you to perform. So when you don't have to pass the hat, then you're a lot more free. It's interesting, busking. It's a really great little microcosm of kind of the theater world, because busking essentially is purely commercial. You need to do what you need to do to keep people happy and paying you.
Yeah.
So you tend to do very dangerous things. You juggle up on very high things. And
Right.
a lot of people in Europe will have seen these sorts of shows in the summer and stuff. But you're very limited. You can't go and do some tender mask piece. Nobody wants to watch that and pay for it. You won't keep an audience. So
Right.
it's this really interesting, you learn about kind of the business of performing.
Right.
And I've really taken a lot from that, because now I gradually got away from the street performing, and I really wanted to start doing things in a theater. I'm not from a theater background at all. I had to sort of learn about lights and sound, and to not do this, all the time, and just stupid stuff. I didn't know that. And the first sort of year or so of doing shows, you're just terrible. And I shudder to think of what the first few shows. I have videos and stuff, and they're just horrible. But you have to,
Absolutely.
you have to go through all that process. And I used a lot of the fringe festival circuit. But I wanted to say that what I discovered then in the theater is that you've already got their money. They've paid, and so obviously, I'm saying the obvious, but
Yeah.
it just suddenly I had this freedom to go and play in areas and create shows that are very similar to the show that I did here today, which is, I think, a nice balance between something that has artistic merit but is very accessible to audiences. That's a real buzzword. And then I get booked because theater presenters and producers know that they can have a reasonable chance to sell some tickets. So I can sort of exist in this between commercial and sort of
Right.
heavily subsidized, high art. I can be sort of in the middle, and I like that because it's great. Often I go to fringe festivals and things where nobody's paying you money, and you have to make everything off the door. So
Right.
it's important to sell tickets.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you learn about marketing and.
And how does all of this, because as you say, there's an interesting line between the very sort of commercialized way of thinking you have to do when you're on the street, and here, how do you develop your material differently when you're working in the theater or from?
I think I'm going to not answer that question, because I think the similarities end there.
Right.
What's happening in the street is not theater. It's a hustle. It's sales. It's selling. It's not theater.
Right.
Because I don't see it as that at all. I see it the best way was after years of doing it that it was described to me as it's a hustle. When you walk in to buy a used car or something, somebody comes up to you and they've got a way to do it.
Right.
And different people, different sellers will have different ways of doing it, but the goal at the end is to sell you that damn car. And when you're doing a street show, it's not about any sort of artistic. The only reason you would do something different or creative is because through a sort of capitalist, you can't have 10 shoe sellers at the market. You have to have one selling fruit, one selling belts, one selling shoe. So the only reason to do something different is to,
Right.
it's a bit like politics or something. Like, it's hilarious where you get this, it's just like the race to the middle. I'm getting fired up about it now. You end up seeing, and that's one reason that I knew I had to leave street performing, is because I could see that there was your creativity, you're completely handcuffed. You need to exist in a way that allows you some sort of creativity, but only so long as it is keeping your crowds thick and fat.
Right, yeah.
And this is both for worlds where you are getting paid to perform and by a festival, or where you're getting just stuff from the money.
Right.
And it really dawned on me when I was booked at a couple festivals, and I would just be sitting there with like 9 other acts, in the green room, and they were all like, one guy's juggling machetes, one guy's juggling torches, another guy's juggling chainsaws, and they all think they're all doing something really different, and you're just like, this is not my scene.
Right.
But I shouldn't be negative about street performing. For me, it was my school, so that's where I trained.
Yeah.
In clowning.
But how do you feel from watching the show?
Yeah.
There's obvious, there's a very close connection to the audience.
So that comes from that. I mean,
Yeah.
in street performing, you become hyped because you become so paranoid about anybody leaving your audience that you become incredibly sensitive. I mean, they say that about actors and improvisers. I mean, you have to listen to the audience all the time. You have to listen to performers. And in street performing, you get obsessive about it. So, because you're always watching to see if people are leaving, and so you become incredibly aware of your audience, too much.
Right.
And if anything, in the theater now, I need to remember, like someone in the show here was taking pictures, and that's a good actor. I'm not an actor at all. I'm a clown, and they're very different things. A good actor is able to just do the same show for 2 people or 2,000. With 10 people taking pictures, somebody on the phone, they can just sort of put on this, performance. But a clown, and definitely someone coming from the street, you become so I have to unlearn some of those things because, sometimes babies leave, and someone in the front row here maybe, has to go to the toilet, so they walk in front of everybody and then they go out. And if that happens if you're too aware of that, then you let that distract you. But, a good actor and a good we'll just ignore that because it's not important. So don't call any attention to it and get on with the piece.
Right.
So, you asked that question before, and I said I'm going to ignore the answer to it. So in some ways, that's where the end of, I learned about how to relate to an audience to some degree in street performing, but I didn't learn anything about theater. I didn't learn anything about creativity or a creative process. I didn't learn how you start with an idea and build it into something that then can be presented to people, because that's not what you're doing. You're driven by, there's a difference between running an art gallery on the main street and running a hot dog stand. Isn't there? One of them they need to, and then also, how about an art gallery, a hot dog stand, and then maybe a youth center that is totally subsidized by the local council. Yeah. So the youth center is going to get they're not concerned about, charging people to come in the door. The art gallery, I'm not sure about this metaphor, but I'm going to go with it. The art gallery, has some sort of, they need to be showing different things that are going to pull people in, but then they have a commercial base in the hot dog guy. Well, he or she needs to just do the best business that they can. Yeah. So,
But because this show, Six Toes Broken Bones, is one of the earlier shows that you have. And I've
So this was the first, this is kind of the transition show. So this is me 6 years ago deciding, I put the best way, most creative people will know, and I learned this, is you need to give yourself deadlines. If you're going to get anything done, you have to put something has to put you under pressure, or you have to commit to something.
Right, yep.
So with this show, I knew about fringe festivals. I hadn't really done them, and I managed to phone up this venue for a venue. There's a big fringe festival in Australia, in Adelaide, and I committed to it. I didn't know anything about shadow puppetry, but it was 7-8 months away. but I didn't have I wasn't working at the time. You can do a lot in 8 months.
Yeah.
So I did. So I committed to it. I didn't. That's why the show is called Sticks, Stones, Broken Bones, because I pulled the name out of my butt. It just completely means nothing. I just wanted something that kind of looked good on a poster and didn't sound like anything else. So I Googled it a bit. Okay, that looks like a bit different. And then I committed. Then I had like 8 months to make a show, and that was this show. 6 months, 5 years ago. It was very different then. It was about the same length, but it had twice as many puppets. So I was just sort of going, boom, 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 boom. I was trying stuff out, and I had this sort of Darwinian way of like, you try it in front of the audience. If it wasn't working, you're cut. It was like this, a bit like these talent shows on TV. You're like, no, you don't make. So in my workshop now, I've got all these puppets that I made for shows, and they weren't working. They get cut, and they're sitting there crying, wondering when they'll get a chance to be on stage. But that's why these shows work, is because you don't see you saw 8 ideas that work really well. You don't see the other 300 that were kind of crap. So you cut them.
Yeah.
Or were complicated, or quite often too. Like I travel with just those 2 suitcases. Everything fits into 2 suitcases. So quite often something will just require a little too much technical, or require something big, and so you chuck it. So I'm try to keep things very portable so that I can travel easily and take up gigs wherever.
Yeah. And in terms of content in this show, it's like what you say, like when you boil something down to the essence of a larger process, of a larger sort of.
So the way I make well, maybe it might help if I explain a little bit how I make shows. I've made 3 shows now. This is the first one, and I've sort of, the process has evolved a bit, but I don't write them, obviously. They're devised. I had to learn what devising was, and someone told me, I was explaining how I make my shows, and then, oh, you devised them. I was, yeah, there's a word for that, okay. So I don't write them. I sit down with a couple constraints. So I have very specific constraints. I don't know why, but I've just decided that this would be a good way to do it. So things like everything needs to fit into a suitcase. Minimal words, no text driven. Sometimes you have a minimum, like the chess match, then they say I love you and stuff, so you have some words, but I didn't want to have text. I didn't want to have plot and stories. I didn't want to have I wanted to celebrate the joy of this clown character making things, showing it and sharing it with people, and the joy of having something come alive and then it's gone. I didn't want to have, that's his mother and it's the daughter and she broke up with me. I didn't want to have, narrative theater. I just wanted to have these little. So what happened with this show, so I set those constraints out, and then I have a couple other rules. One is no singing, because puppets are always, especially in North America, they always sing. Dancing, no fighting. I had these sort of rules that I wanted to avoid doing that, because you often see that in puppetry. So I didn't know, no talking, no singing, no dancing. And then I think I said no fighting. And then, minimal text. So then it becomes this great challenge of, and then, other things like it's got to be 55 minutes long or whatever, 60 minutes long. It's got to be suitable for families, because that's the producer in me knowing that I want to be able to sell it to a family audience, but I also want adults to be able to watch it. I do take some inspiration from the success of like Pixar films, how they make things that work for a couple different demographics. So adults alone can go see it, but kids welcome as well. So like I've done a couple tours in Germany where it's just adults in the audience. But then 2 weeks ago I was in Australia doing a kids fest for, 300 school kids.
Right.
So I go with that kind of list of rules, and then I start to make stuff around that. So this show, each one was just an idea. I had the idea with the horse race was I just had this idea of like, is there something I can do with a landscape that's moving? So then I sort of make the contraption, and this is like number 10, right? The first 9 didn't work, and so you chuck them, and and this is the winner, hey! And then, I've got a landscape, and originally I thought it was going to be a guy in a car, but that wasn't so interesting, and and then I thought a dog, and I couldn't make a good dog, but then I thought maybe a horse, and so after a week of playing with that idea, suddenly I've got a horse, and a horse should be racing, and that could be good, because, and then it just sort of evolves.
Yeah.
And then if maybe you get stuck on it, so you leave it, and you go to another one, the guy with the brain surgery. Look, I didn't sit down and let's make that. I made a puppet, and then this part of the thing you do with puppets is you make them and then you see what they're good at doing.
Right.
So I don't make puppets that are meant to do something. I often make them and then they tell me what they're
Doing.
So I've got, like I said, I've got all these puppets that are good at doing things that are of no use to me. I've got a great little mouse that should be in a show. I've got all kinds of things. I've got a really good sort of ogre Frankenstein that.
Right.
And this one, often things involve the head and the mouth, and then the other big constraint is I'm alone on stage.
Right.
So I'm not writing shows for 2, 3, 4 people. It's just me and a technician pushing a button that changes the lights and the music. They're not coming. There's nobody coming to help me, and so I've only got 2 hands, 2 legs. So then that becomes like, well, what can I do with 2 people? And that's how the chess scene came.
Right.
What can 2 people be doing? I don't want them singing. I don't want them dancing. I don't want them talking. What can they do for 10 minutes sort of facing each other? Oh, they're playing a game. And then I thought, okay, well, they need some hands, and then so, okay, can I do it with my feet? Yeah, okay, that's working. And then okay, if I do the chess pieces like this. For the longest time, I was trying to pick up the pieces and move them. And no, you don't need to do that. You just push them. Okay, great. So then that scene evolves. And then once that's happening, then the character, you start to think, 2 people, what could it be? 2 lovers or 2, and they just sort of evolved. I don't know the names, you just sort of pick them. And then just through performing it, I had this idea, maybe after 50 shows, he should cheat. Oh, yeah. Actually, I think someone gave me the idea. And so then it just sort of evolves like that.
Yeah.
But this show, it gets to a point where you just sort of stop working on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this show was, I don't want to say it was unwatchable in the beginning, but it was a bit of a mess. But then you just start to, cut things away.
Because watching it now, it feels almost like there's a sort of it is a dramaturgy to it that sort of ends up somewhere for the audience. So at least for me, when I'm watching it, when you come to the end and you tell everyone to have a nice day. And
so this show, the trick though is, I'll give you a great bit of advice. Do a show 1,000 times and you will, you'll come up with all that stuff.
Yeah.
The hard part is doing it, I don't understand how companies make shows and they do a couple rehearsals and then they have a first show that needs to be good and they invite press and stuff. You need to do it, for me, 50 times or something. So that's where the Fringe festivals are really good.
Yeah.
So this one feels good and it feels complete because I've just done it so much.
Yeah.
Probably 1,000, maybe 1,200 times.
Right.
And part of that is because I've had some gigs where maybe I'll do 4 shows in a day or something.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get hired by museums or something in the summer. Where they do you do 60 shows in a week or something.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. You do a shorter version and stuff.
Yeah.
So when you're doing it that much, and because it is comedy, you're listening to people, and if stuff's meant to be funny in that moment and they're not laughing, well, you change it and you evolve it.
Right.
And a lot of accidents happen, and you listen to them. The thing with the guy and my hair, that was just an accident one day. My head was poking out, and the hair was there, and I just did it. And in your head, you're like, but that's what a clown does. A clown doesn't write stuff. A clown, in your head, you've got these 2 people when you're performing, these 2 sort of entities. You've got the actor who's sort of the director, who knows sort of the rules of theater, who knows about, and who's taking notes like that. And then the clown is the one who's sort of finding all these things.
Yeah.
So the actor sort of keeps the clown under control, and then is taking notes of things that are important and interesting. So then the real game of acting, the only time I ever act is when I need to recreate and fake it, those moments, so that they seem like accidents. This show doesn't have a lot, but I've got another show where there's a lot of kind of, it's not slapstick, but accidents happening where it looks like, oh, you don't know if that was meant to happen. The screen falls or something.
Yeah.
So then that's the job of an actor to do it convincingly.
Yeah.
Because I hate slapstick. So you try to do it in a way so that it feels like, oh, we didn't know. So that's when the actor kind of comes in. What's another moment in this show where, I'm trying to think if there's another moment where there's something that happened by accident and then I remembered it and so I include it. I'm trying to think. Maybe I'll think of something. Yeah.
I was wondering, just seeing the 2 shows that you performed here, with the audience, the age in the audience was a bit different. Do you find the show to vary much depending on how the audience behaves and how they are?
Yeah, but it's a chameleon. Like it can. Every show really is different. So from my perspective, like every performance is different.
Right.
So I never perform it the same, because I like to feel like there is a goal that they feel like it's an element of it that's been custom around them.
Right.
And that part of that ninja bit is that. I mean, and those are old street performing tricks, to work with a volunteer and make them. As soon as you bring somebody on stage, everybody is interested because it's one of them, you know. Everybody's really happy that they didn't get chosen, but everybody really wants to see this person succeed. And then there's all these little tricks. I used to do a lot of interacting with audience members.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess there's a bit of a craft to it, but part of it is just not being scared by it, and I guess a level of experience. So that whole bit is meant, I think, to, and sometimes that bit tanks. I mean, for as much as it can go really well, you can have, you know, I don't get too philosophical, but you definitely get the opposite. As far as it goes up, it definitely goes down. I've had guys get up there and, you know, I don't know, it just doesn't work. They ruin it, or they don't. So part of that is there's a risk involved with bringing them up, but that's what makes it interesting. I mean, you can just feel it. The energy goes. Everybody gets a bit more interested once that guy's on stage. And when it goes well, you can kind of milk it and make it a bit longer. The show, we were just saying before, the show here was running about 54 minutes, 53 minutes, and this show can be as little as like 42 minutes.
Yeah.
So it can 9 minutes of stuff can just happen.
I just found it interesting when we talked the other day that when you talked about the fact that you weren't coming from theater, you're sort of coming from something else, going into the theater. How do you, a tad more philosophical open question here, coming into the theater from another world of performing, how do you feel, what do you think the theater is struggling with in our times? I mean,
what do you, in terms of finding audiences? Or?
Yeah, or in terms of being something valuable for people.
You know, it's, when I perform in cities, I perform in a lot of countries, and every country really is different because it has its own traditions, politics, sort of industry, you know, gossip, and just the way things are done. Every country really is quite different. But kind of across the world, if you're not doing stuff that has an element, a commercial recognition, like a possibility of selling tickets, if you're doing stuff that falls outside of that for whatever reason, it's a struggle. So if you're doing stuff that's very avant-garde or has really niche markets or is very stuck in, you know, classical things, I mean, you can succeed in, I think, quite a few metropolitan areas of the world because you'll find your audience. But once you leave those metropolitan areas, you really, and can't be news to you. So that is, I think, unfortunate because I don't know what was happening 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But we've got to a point now where you know, maybe it's the way that we're all moving to cities and stuff, and so many creative people, you know, end up in cities just to be around like-minded people. I don't know. It's just the movement of all the artists in the world are going to cities. So audiences are getting really developed in these urban areas. And we've talked before about how, like, in Australia and the UK, stand-up comedy now has gotten so sophisticated that it really is blurring the lines, and it is, you know, it is theater, and there's clowns that do really good performances to audiences who are used to seeing stand-up. So, like, if you can work in that sort of market, you can do quite well in the English-speaking world. If we could talk about, you know, US, England, Australia, Canada. I mean, there are, you know, all these the cheap shows, the shows that don't involve a lot of expense. You know, I don't know what it is, but there doesn't seem to be audience appetite for things that fall outside of that, outside of urban areas. And I don't know why that is. I'm a bit sick of people sort of blaming the internet and TV because, I mean, if it wasn't the internet, it was TV before it, and before that it was, radio? I don't know. Like, I mean, people have always had reasons to stay at home. But I think, you know, obviously I believe in the enduring interest that people will have in going to see a live show. There's a very interesting, I don't know quite how this relates to the question, but I had a great conversation once in Australia with a guy who was involved with designing theaters. And we talked about how the architecture has changed over the years and how a lot of places are really struggling, maybe a town of 50,000, 100,000 people, that 20 years ago they invested in building a huge, like 800-seat theater. And now there's nothing that'll fill 800 seats in a town that size because audiences have changed. So I like but maybe they don't, if they're lucky, they have a black box as well, like this, where you do nice intimate shows. And you can get 120 people easily. So if you can play for audiences, around the world for 100, 120, 150 people. But audiences have changed and what they then need to do is they need to rely on state-sponsored companies that can fill a stage that big and that have marketing budgets. So it's big operas and big productions or big well-known TV stand-up, that'll fill those seats. So audiences' behavior has really, really changed, but for this sort of less than 200 people capacity and places like this, it's never been better to be in performing arts. I mean, there's just, if you can play to this kind of size, there's and the networks of festivals around the world that then will get you into other things. Like, it's just amazing. If you're a company where you need, constant support to pay for your travel even. So even if you're a company that, has a lighting technician and also a costume and maybe there's 3 on stage, so suddenly you're 5 people, that's 5 hotel rooms. And then maybe you've got a couple bit of freight and just, you can't. Like, look how easy it was for me to come here. I come with 2 suitcases. He flew me from Australia to come here. We're doing 4 shows and a couple workshops in Norway. It's great. I mean, so if you can be portable like that, there's never been a better time. So, and just the last thing I'll say on that is I've noticed this thing in Australia and the UK where they haven't had such a strong direct support to the performing arts. I'm totally talking on my ass here, but it's a theory, but I think it's true. Companies haven't been heavily subsidized for very long. If you compare it to like Europe and, gosh, I've been to places in France and in Belgium and where the artists, like, it's just crazy. The amount of support they get, it's wonderful, but it's hard to believe. I mean, this is maybe a few years ago now and things have changed with budgets and things, but I think a lot of Australian, American, Canadian, British performance groups, companies have been very used to working on a very slim budget and to have always an eye on the door in box office sales.
Right.
And so I think now those companies that are a bit tuned into that and have good marketing savvy, I think there's never been a better time. I think there's just so much going around around the world. But if you're a company if you've got 5, 6 people and everybody needs to be paid properly as they should, I think it's tougher. So that's my answer to that.
It's a good answer, though.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's all right, yeah.
And we hope we get you back in not so long.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.